OG Rose here, and today we're going to be talking about a paper called On Words and Determinism. And one of the arguments I want to focus on in the paper, because it goes through a lot, just kind of builds, is the idea that it's kind of through language where we have reason to believe that human beings have free will. Now, it's really important to note at the end of the day, it's probably not possible for us to ever observe anything that's going to 100% prove determinism or 100% prove freedom. And often it seems like human beings are a mixture of the two, right? I mean, and then it just comes down to an emphasis debate. I don't pick my genes, for example, and maybe I get a tumor in my brain, to use the Sam Harris example, that makes me unable to morally reason very well. But, if I made decisions that resulted in me getting the tumor in my brain, if that was theoretically possible, then even that loss of free will in the future due to the tumor would be an expression of free will. There's arguments on the example that we're often influenced, or, our teacher will say something and that will influence us to think something. So we'll think that thought is a result of our free choice, but really it's something that's influenced on us. But again, if I chose to go to that classroom, then I chose to be in the environment where that influence was put upon me, and thus that influence would be an expression of my freedom. So it becomes very hard to isolate it. It becomes like I think, sort of a Schrodinger's cat sort of situation, where if you look at it one way, like if I look at a chair, for example, well, chair is immateriality, right? So it's going to look like determinism in a sense, because I'm going to observe cause and effect. But then at the same time, if human beings do have freedom, then me moving my arm is going to be an expression of freedom, and yet I'm only going to be able to observe it within physical terms. So you can always say that if freedom exists, it's always going to be dressed in causality, in a sense. It's always going to look like it could be determinism. So if we're going to have reason to believe in freedom, and there's a lot of papers on this topic by O.G. Rose, but I'm not going to cover them all here, but if we want to have reason to believe in freedom, in a sense, we have to get around materiality. We have to look behind materiality. And I'm not trying to be a dualist, but it's kind of in a sense that the moment freedom is expressed, it's wearing determinism. And so how do you catch freedom when it's not in deterministic clothing, especially if it's the case that the moment human beings look at the world, then it's going to be dressed up in causality. So if we look at something, then boom, if there was freedom there a second ago, now it's gone, just like Schrodinger's cat. And I think if we're going to do that, I think it's probably going to be almost negative arguments very often. I mean, there's some people saying that quantum mechanics gives us reason to believe in freedom, because we can't necessarily, there's randomness. But Sam Harris argues that just because you can't guess the results of where something is going to be does not necessarily mean that those things are free. That just might be a testing element. And again, it could be, that's true. So it kind of goes both ways. But, when someone... So then we kind of have to make a negative argument for freedom. And what I mean by that is something that doesn't directly prove freedom, but would kind of give us reason to think that something was taken in certain circumstances. So, for example, someone in prison, well, they certainly believe in freedom because they feel like they've lost it. And the fact that you feel like you've lost freedom the very fact that you feel like you've lost something would give you reason to think that you had something. In this situation, that would be freedom. Now, maybe you didn't. Maybe it's all an illusion. But you would have reason to think that you had freedom. So likewise, if someone comes up to you, the example made in the paper, if someone comes up to you and they say, do you want to go to the movies tonight? You're no longer free to exist in a world where somebody doesn't come up and ask you, do you want to go to the movies tonight? And because that happens, you start wondering, oh shoot, I actually don't want to go to the movies, but if I tell them I don't, they might be upset, or maybe I should go. And even though I don't want to, it'll be the right thing to do. So you're now kind of feeling anxious, right? Because you just rather them not ask you in the first place, but they have now. So now you have to make a choice. And you feel like in that situation that your peace, your serenity, your tranquility of mind has been taken from you. So you feel like something's been taken. And if someone came along and asked you, well, what was that thing taken from you? You'd kind of be like, well, in a sense, it's my freedom, right? Because you're no longer free to exist in a world where somebody doesn't ask you, do you want to go to the movies? When you really don't, but you also don't want to make them upset, and you don't want to come off as an introvert or something. And so you feel like your freedom's been taken. And the very fact that we as human beings are always kind of at the mercy of what other people say or do, someone comes, you could be walking down the street and at any moment somebody could drive their car into you, or, somebody could, I don't know, tackle you or something. And so the very fact that we're always vulnerable, there's a sense in which we're always vulnerable. The very fact that we feel vulnerability, which I think Sartre is correct, that the main feeling of freedom is anxiety. The very fact that we feel vulnerability and anxiety would give us reason to think that we do in fact have freedom, even though we can never see the freedom directly, even though we can never be 100% sure that we have freedom, because it's always concealing itself the moment we look at it. And maybe we didn't look at it, we just think we did. So that's one of the arguments of the paper. There's a lot more that it's going to go through. I hope you have a chance to read the paper. If you would like, you can find it on ogrose.com, and thank you for your time.